Some moments don't begin loudly. They arrive quietly, the way real life does, carrying a weight you don't understand until it's already sitting on your chest. This was one of those moments, the kind that feels ordinary from the outside but changes something deep inside the people standing there. Sandra stepped back without realizing she was moving. Her breath caught, not because of fear, but because the words she had been holding in for years suddenly felt too heavy to keep inside. Her eyes filled before she could stop them, and she turned her face away, embarrassed by the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. She had always been the strong one, the composed one, the person who smiled even when things hurt. Keanu saw it instantly. Not just the tears, but the reason behind them. He didn't rush her, didn't say anything clever or dramatic. He simply reached out and held her hands with both of his, grounding her in the present moment. His grip wasn't tight, just steady, as if to say, you don't have to stand alone right now. The room felt smaller, quieter, as if the world had respectfully stepped back. Sandra's shoulders trembled, not from weakness, but from the exhaustion of carrying unspoken pain for so long. She had spent her life being kind to others, listening, supporting, forgiving. Yet in that moment, she felt undeserving of the same kindness she gave so freely. Keanu leaned closer, his voice low and calm, not trying to fix anything, not trying to change her feelings. He was simply there, and that presence did something words never could. It reminded her that courage isn't always about standing tall. Sometimes it's about allowing yourself to be seen when you're falling apart. As Sandra slowly lifted her eyes to meet his, a realization settled between them. This wasn't just about tears or comfort. It was about a truth that had been waiting years to surface, a truth that would challenge both of them to choose honesty over fear. And as his hands stayed steady in hers, Sandra understood that once this truth was spoken, nothing between them would ever be the same again. Sandra didn't pull her hands away, even though every instinct told her to retreat and rebuild the walls she knew so well. Her breathing slowed, but the ache in her chest grew sharper, as if calm had given space for something deeper to surface. She looked at Keanu again, really looked at him, and wondered how he could see so much without asking a single question. She tried to speak, but the first words came out broken. Not dramatic, not poetic, just honest. She admitted how tired she was of always being strong, of being the one people leaned on while she quietly learned how to carry her own pain without complaint. Her voice shook when she confessed that kindness, when given endlessly, can sometimes feel invisible. Keanu listened without interrupting. He didn't nod excessively or offer reassurance too soon. His silence wasn't empty, it was respectful. When he finally spoke, his words were simple, almost gentle. He told her that strength without softness becomes a prison, and that even the kindest hearts need a place to rest. He admitted, quietly, that he recognized her exhaustion because he had lived it too. Sandra felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she wasn't being comforted from above or admired from a distance. She was being met at eye level. Her tears returned, but this time they felt different, lighter, as if they were releasing something old rather than opening something new. She asked him why he cared so deeply, why he stayed so present when most people stepped back at the first sign of emotional weight. Keanu hesitated just for a second, and that hesitation carried more meaning than any confident answer ever could. His eyes softened, but there was something else there too, fear. He tightened his grip on her hands, not to hold her still, but to steady himself. And in that pause, Sandra sensed it. There was more he hadn't said yet. Something personal, something risky, something that, once spoken, could change the balance between them forever. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with everything that hadn't yet found words. Sandra felt it pressing against her ribs, urging her to either step back or step closer. For once, she didn't choose distance. She stayed exactly where she was, her hands still in his, waiting. Keanu finally spoke, but his voice carried a different weight now. He admitted that he had learned early in life how easy it was to lose people, how quickly love could turn into absence. He explained that this was why he never rushed emotions, never took connection lightly. Caring deeply was not something he did casually, because when he cared fully, and that kind of commitment scared him as much as it grounded him. Sandra listened, her tears slowing, her heart racing. His honesty didn't feel rehearsed or heroic. It felt human, flawed, vulnerable, She realized that the calm strength she saw in him wasn't the absence of pain, but the result of surviving it without becoming bitter. That realization humbled her. She confessed something of her own then, that she had spent years convincing herself she didn't need anyone to hold her steady. That independence had become her armor, even when it grew heavy. Admitting she needed support felt like failure to her, but standing there now, she understood it differently. Maybe needing someone wasn't weakness. Maybe it was trust. Keanu's thumbs brushed lightly against her hands, grounding her again. He told her that courage isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to stay open after you do. His words didn't sound like advice. They sounded like a promise he lived by, even when it hurt. As their eyes met, Sandra felt the truth settle in her chest. Whatever this moment was becoming, it wasn't simple and it wasn't safe. It would demand honesty, patience, and the kind of bravery that comes only when you risk being changed. And deep down, she knew there was no turning back now, because both of them had already stepped past the point of pretending. The night outside the window had deepened without either of them noticing. Streetlights glowed softly, casting long reflections across the glass, but inside the room time felt suspended. Sandra shifted her weight slightly, still holding Keanu's hands, aware of how unfamiliar and yet how natural the moment felt. It frightened her how easily she had stopped guarding herself. She broke the silence first, her voice quieter than before but steadier. She told him that she had spent most of her life believing control was the same as safety. If she could manage her emotions, plan her reactions, and stay composed, then nothing could truly hurt her. But standing here now, she realized how lonely that philosophy had been. Control had kept her standing, yes, but it had also kept her distant. Keanu listened with the same focused attention, but this time there was a subtle shift in him. He wasn't just hearing her story, he was letting it affect him. He admitted that he admired her strength, but that he had always sensed the cost of it. He spoke about moments when he had seen her smile through exhaustion, laugh through pressure, and move forward when rest would have been kinder. He confessed that watching that had both inspired him and worried him. Sandra felt exposed but not judged. His words didn't accuse her, they acknowledged her. That recognition struck deeper than praise ever could. She realized that most people saw her resilience as something unbreakable, but he saw it as something precious that needed care. She asked him when he had learned to be so attentive, so emotionally present. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he loosened one hand just enough to rub his thumb against her palm, a small, grounding gesture. Then he told her about loss, not in dramatic detail, but in quiet truths. He spoke about loving deeply and losing suddenly, about how grief teaches you that moments matter because they are fragile. He explained that this was why he chose presence over performance, listening over speaking, and sincerity over comfort. As he spoke, Sandra felt her own defenses soften further. His story wasn't meant to impress her. It was meant to explain him. She saw now that his kindness wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, shaped by pain and guided by humility. That understanding stirred something powerful inside her. She admitted that part of her fear came from the possibility of leaning on someone who might one day disappear. She had seen enough endings to know that nothing was guaranteed. Depending on someone felt like giving fate too much power. Saying this out loud made her chest tighten, but she forced herself not to retreat. Keanu didn't dismiss her fear. Instead, he nodded slowly and said something that stayed with her. He told her that love doesn't promise permanence, but it offers meaning. That the risk of loss is not a flaw in connection, it's the price of depth. Avoiding that risk might protect you from pain, but it also protects you from joy. Those words lingered in the air between them. Sandra felt them echo inside her, challenging beliefs she had held onto for years. She realized she had been confusing independence with isolation, mistaking self-sufficiency for emotional safety. The truth was harder but clearer now. Real strength included knowing when to let someone stand beside you. She stepped closer without fully realizing she had moved. The space between them narrowed, and with it came a surge of emotion she struggled to name. It wasn't romance in the dramatic sense, nor was it simple friendship. It was connection, deep, honest, and alive with possibility. Keanu noticed the shift and inhaled slowly, as if grounding himself. He confessed that he had wanted to protect this moment by not pushing it, by letting things unfold naturally. But he also admitted that holding back too much could become its own kind of dishonesty. His voice lowered as he said that what scared him most wasn't rejection. It was the idea of staying silent and losing the chance to be real. Sandra felt her heart race. She understood that he was standing at the same edge she was, facing the same uncertainty. Neither of them was trying to control the outcome anymore. They were simply choosing truth. She told him that she didn't have answers, only feelings that felt both new and familiar. She explained that whatever this was, she wanted it to be built slowly, with honesty and respect, not expectations or illusions. Saying that felt like reclaiming her agency rather than surrendering it. Keanu smiled then, not wide or triumphant, but soft and relieved. He agreed, saying that depth mattered more to him than speed and sincerity more than labels. He told her that what he valued most was trust, earned through consistency rather than promises. The air between them felt lighter yet charged. Sandra noticed how her breathing had steadied, how the ache in her chest had transformed into something warmer. She felt seen without being overwhelmed, supported without being diminished. It was a balance she had never experienced before. But just as comfort began to settle, doubt crept in quietly. Sandra wondered what this connection would demand of her. Openness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of hurt. She asked him, almost in a whisper, what would happen if one of them couldn't carry the weight of this honesty someday. Keanu answered without hesitation. He said that no one carries everything alone, and no one carries it perfectly. What mattered was choosing kindness even in moments of misunderstanding, courage even when fear returned, and humility enough to admit when you needed help. He didn't promise that things would always be easy. He promised that they would be real. That promise shook her more than any declaration ever could. She realized that what frightened her most was not the risk of pain, but the responsibility of being fully present. Real connection required effort, patience, and emotional bravery. It required showing up even when retreat felt safer. As they stood there, hands still joined, Sandra felt the weight of the decision forming inside her. This was no longer just a moment of comfort. It was an invitation to step into a connection that would ask her to grow, to trust, and to let go of the armor she had worn for so long. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she squeezed his hands gently, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had been said and everything still unspoken. Keanu understood. He squeezed back, not claiming anything, not demanding reassurance, simply matching her intention. Outside, a car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating the room before fading away. The world continued, indifferent to the quiet transformation happening within it. But for Sandra and Keanu, something fundamental had shifted. She knew that whatever came next would test them. There would be misunderstandings, fear, and moments when old habits resurfaced. But she also knew that this connection had already changed how she saw herself. She no longer felt like strength meant standing alone. As the silence returned, it no longer felt heavy. It felt intentional, like the pause before a new chapter begins. And deep inside, Sandra understood that this was the moment she would look back on one day, not as the beginning of a story, but as the moment she chose to step forward instead of away. Morning arrived quietly, as if it understood the gravity of what had unfolded the night before. Pale light slipped through the curtains, touching the edges of the room but not disturbing the stillness between them. Sandra sat by the window now, her knees drawn close, watching the city wake up. Everything outside looked the same, yet she felt different, lighter, and more exposed at the same time. Keanu stood a few steps behind her, giving her space without withdrawing. He knew moments like this needed room to breathe. The connection they had shared hadn't faded with the night. If anything, it felt clearer in the daylight, stripped of shadows and silence. Daylight had a way of asking honest questions. Sandra spoke first, her voice calm but thoughtful. She said that after he left the room earlier, even for a moment, she had felt the familiar urge to retreat into herself. Old habits don't disappear overnight. She had almost convinced herself that what they shared was temporary, a fragile emotional moment that would soften with distance. But instead of shrinking, something inside her had held steady. She told him she realized how often she had mistaken emotional distance for maturity. She had believed that keeping her feelings contained made her wiser, safer. But sitting alone in the quiet afterward, she had understood something new. Distance hadn't made her stronger. It had simply kept her from being fully alive. Keanu leaned against the wall, listening. He admitted that he had felt his own doubts surface, too. He had wondered if opening up had been selfish, if he had placed emotional weight on her when she was already carrying so much. Vulnerability always carries that fear, the fear of burdening someone you care about. Sandra turned toward him then, meeting his eyes directly. She told him that what he had offered wasn't weight, it was balance. For the first time in a long while, she hadn't felt responsible for holding everything together. She had felt accompanied. That word lingered between them. Accompanied, not rescued, not led, simply walking alongside someone. They talked for a long time after that. About boundaries, about fears that hadn't fully faded, about the quiet expectations people place on them without realizing it. Sandra spoke about how often she felt defined by who she appeared to be rather than who she was becoming. Keanu shared how visibility had taught him to guard certain parts of himself, even while longing to be understood beyond the surface. The conversation wasn't dramatic or rushed. It unfolded slowly, honestly, with moments of silence that felt natural rather than strained. Each pause wasn't an absence of words, but a sign of trust, space where neither felt pressured to perform or explain more than they were ready to give. At one point, Sandra admitted that she was afraid of losing herself in connection. She had seen relationships where individuality dissolved into expectation, where kindness became obligation. She didn't want that. She wanted a bond that allowed growth, not dependence. Keanu nodded, telling her that this fear resonated deeply with him. He explained that real connection in his experience wasn't about possession or sacrifice. It was about mutual expansion. Two people choosing to support each other's becoming, not limit it. Those words settled something in her. She realized that the choice before her wasn't between independence and closeness. It was between fear and trust, between repeating old patterns and stepping into unfamiliar honesty. Later that day, they walked outside together. The city noise surrounded them, ordinary and alive. No one noticed them. No one knew what had shifted beneath the surface, and that anonymity felt freeing. Sandra noticed how natural it felt to walk beside him, not needing to fill the silence, not needing to explain herself. Yet even in that calm, doubt returned quietly. She wondered what would happen when life demanded more from them, when schedules clashed, when misunderstandings arose, when emotional energy ran low. She knew connection wasn't sustained by moments alone, but by choices made when things felt inconvenient. As if sensing her thoughts, Keanu spoke gently about commitment, not in terms of promises, but in terms of intention. He said commitment wasn't about certainty, it was about willingness. Willingness to listen when it was uncomfortable, to stay curious instead of defensive, to choose kindness even when pride asked for distance. Sandra absorbed his words, feeling both comforted and challenged. She realized that what lay ahead would require effort, patience, and emotional honesty from both of them. This wasn't a safe, predictable path. It was a meaningful one. By evening, exhaustion settled in, not the draining kind, but the kind that follows emotional truth. They stood again near the doorway, aware that another decision was forming. Whether to pause, to step back into familiar independence, or to continue forward with intention. Sandra felt the weight of that choice pressing against her chest. She took a deep breath and admitted that she couldn't promise fear wouldn't return. She couldn't guarantee clarity or confidence every day, but she could promise honesty. She could promise to speak instead of withdraw, to ask instead of assume. Keanu listened, then shared his own promise, that he would remain present even when things became complicated, that he would respect her boundaries while standing ready to support her when invited, that he wouldn't rush or retreat, he would remain steady. They didn't define what they were becoming. They didn't need to. Labels felt too small for what they were choosing. Instead, they acknowledged the direction they were stepping into, a direction shaped by mutual respect, courage, and a shared understanding of how fragile and valuable real connection can be. As Sandra watched him prepare to leave, a familiar fear surfaced, the fear of absence, of distance undoing everything. But this time, she didn't let it rule her. She understood that connection didn't dissolve when someone walked away physically. It lived in intention, in consistency, in the choices that followed. Before he stepped out, Keanu paused. He didn't offer reassurance wrapped in certainty. He simply said that whatever came next, he was grateful they had chosen honesty over comfort, that this moment mattered regardless of outcome. Sandra nodded, feeling emotion rise again, not tears this time, but clarity. She realized that she had already changed, not because someone else had held her, but because she had allowed herself to be held. As the door closed behind him, she stood quietly for a moment. The room felt different now, not emptier but open. She placed a hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat steady and strong. She knew the next step would test her resolve. Old habits would whisper, fear would resurface, and uncertainty would linger. But she also knew something else, something deeper and more powerful. For the first time, she wasn't walking forward to avoid loneliness or seek validation. She was walking forward because she had chosen courage, and that choice, once made, could not be undone. The next few days didn't feel like a movie. They felt like life, quiet, imperfect, and real. Sandra expected the intensity of that night to fade, like emotions often do when the world returns to routine. Instead, something steadier replaced it. Keanu didn't flood her with messages or dramatic reassurance. He didn't disappear either. He checked in the way someone checks in when they genuinely care, simple words, thoughtful timing, a calm presence that didn't demand anything from her. At first, Sandra didn't know what to do with that kind of consistency. Her instincts searched for hidden expectations. Her mind tried to interpret silence as distance and distance as danger. But each time fear rose, she remembered what she had promised, honesty instead of retreat. One evening, she caught herself staring at her phone, replaying everything, building imaginary endings that hadn't happened. She laughed softly at herself, not in a mocking way, but with humility. She realized how often she had lived in anticipation of pain, like preparing for loss could somehow soften it. She texted him something simple. "I'm spiraling a little, not because of you, just old habits." He replied soon after. "Thank you for telling me. Want me to call, or do you just want someone to sit with you in the quiet?" That message hit her harder than she expected. He wasn't trying to fix her. He was offering options, respect, choice, the kind of kindness that doesn't take control away, it returns it. She asked him to call. When his voice came through the speaker, it didn't carry urgency. It carried warmth. Sandra closed her eyes and let herself lean back against the couch, the tension in her shoulders loosening as if it finally had permission. They talked about small things at first, the kind of talk that keeps life human. Then Sandra admitted the truth she had been afraid to say out loud. She was scared that closeness would lead to losing herself, and she was scared that letting someone matter that much would make the world feel sharper. Keanu didn't argue with her fear. He told her he understood it. Then he said something that stayed with her for the rest of her life. He said, "You won't lose yourself with me because I'm not trying to own your peace. I'm trying to protect it." Sandra swallowed hard. Her eyes stung. Not because she was broken, but because something inside her was finally being treated like it mattered. A week later, they met again in a place that felt ordinary, quiet, simple, away from noise. Sandra noticed how different she felt walking into the room. She was still nervous, still vulnerable, but she wasn't bracing for impact anymore. She was present. Keanu looked at her the way a person looks when they're paying attention, not when they're performing. He asked her how she'd been, and he meant it. Sandra answered honestly, even when the truth sounded messy. She told him there were mornings she felt strong and nights she felt unsure. She told him she was learning to identify when her independence was healthy and when it was just fear disguised as strength. Keanu shared something too. He had spent much of his life believing love meant endurance, carrying pain quietly, staying steady, expecting little. But being with her had shown him another kind of love. Love that wasn't just survival. Love that was softness, mutual care, and emotional responsibility. They sat in silence for a while after that, not because they had nothing to say, but because some truths need quiet to settle. Sandra watched him breathe, watched the calm in his posture, and realized something profound. This wasn't a fantasy of perfect happiness. This was an agreement to meet life honestly. Then came the test neither of them expected. A misunderstanding, small at first, grew over the course of a day. A message read too quickly, a tone assumed. Sandra felt the old reflex rise, step back, protect yourself, don't need anyone. She almost gave in. She almost convinced herself that leaving early was maturity, that silence was dignity, that distance was control. Her hand hovered over her phone, ready to write something polite and final. But then she remembered the night she cried and he held her hands with both of his. She remembered the steadiness, the respect, the choice he gave her, and she asked herself a question she had avoided her whole life. What if courage is staying and talking? Her fingers trembled as she typed. I think I misunderstood you. I'm feeling hurt and I don't want to run from this. Can we talk face to face? Keanu's reply came quickly. Yes, thank you for staying. When they met, Sandra didn't pretend she was fine. She explained what she had felt, what she had assumed, what fear had tried to convince her of. Her voice shook, but she didn't hide. She didn't perform. She didn't blame. She simply owned her emotions and spoke them with humility. Keanu listened. Then he apologized, not in a defensive way, not in a let's move on way, but in a real way. He clarified what he meant, admitted what he could have said more clearly, and thanked her for choosing communication over disappearance. And there it was, the moment Sandra realized this story was no longer about romance. It was about healing. It was about two people practicing kindness when it mattered most, when misunderstanding could have turned into distance, when pride could have turned into silence, when fear could have rewritten everything. Sandra felt her chest loosen, as if the world had just given her proof that connection could survive tension. That closeness didn't have to be fragile if it was built on courage and respect. Keanu reached for her hands again, the same way he had that first night. This time, Sandra didn't step back. She let herself be held, not because she needed saving, but because she trusted the person in front of her. Keanu looked at her and said softly, I want to be a safe place for you, not because you can't stand alone, but because you shouldn't always have to. Sandra's eyes filled again, but she didn't turn away. She smiled through the tears, her voice barely above a whisper. And I want to stop proving I'm okay, she said. I want to actually be okay. They didn't promise forever. They promised something more realistic and, in its own way, more beautiful, to show up. To keep choosing humility over ego, courage over comfort, and kindness over fear. In the weeks that followed, Sandra noticed the quiet changes in herself. She slept better, she laughed without forcing it. She asked for help when she needed it, not just from Keanu, but from people around her. She stopped treating vulnerability like a mistake. She began treating it like a language. And Keanu changed too. He stopped carrying everything alone. He allowed himself to express needs instead of swallowing them. He learned that being strong didn't mean being silent. It meant being honest without cruelty, steady without control, and present without pride. One evening, long after the hardest emotions had settled, they walked together under city lights. The streets glowed, the air was cool, and the world felt wide instead of threatening. Sandra glanced at him and realized the most powerful thing wasn't what he had done for her. It was what he had reminded her of. That kindness is not weakness. That courage is not loud. That humility is not being small, it's being real. And resilience isn't pretending nothing hurts. It's choosing to keep your heart open even when it does. She stopped walking for a second, and Keanu turned to her, concerned. Sandra took a breath and said, That night when I cried, you didn't try to make me stop. You didn't try to change me, you just stayed. Keanu smiled gently. Because I knew you weren't breaking, he said. You were finally letting yourself breathe. Sandra nodded, tears returning one last time, not from pain, but from gratitude. Then, without drama, without performance, she squeezed his hands and stepped closer. And in that quiet moment beneath the lights, Sandra realized something that felt like a lesson the universe had been waiting to teach her. The strongest people aren't the ones who never fall apart. They're the ones who finally let someone hold their hands and still choose to stand up with their own feet.